I'm here to talk to you today about perplexing punctuation. I know that everybody pretty well finds punctuation really frustrating. We think that we know it, we think we've got a handle on it. We did it in school, and then we get into this program, and I think a lot of us find it overwhelming. I know that when I took the course, I thought I was quite good with English, and then I got going and overthought everything, questioned everything. Things that seemed so simple before suddenly weren't. And so I want to help you guys break it down in the most basic forms today, just so that it's hopefully not so overwhelming. So the first thing we're going to talk about are commas. These are the most common things that I get asked about. They drive people crazy. I even remember in the workforce, one of my accounts, the team lead sent out an email to everybody on the team, I think about 60 people, and said that everybody was going overboard on the commas. They were comma crazy. That's why I remember this phrase so well. So it is something that really does drive people crazy, and it takes a while to get a handle on. So I wanted to present you with a sentence today that's quite a complicated sentence and help you break it down, because I know when most people were to look at this, they would be a little bit lost as to how to punctuate it properly. I made sure that this sentence just had commas and a period, of course. So we'll just break this down into bits and pieces and make this as simple as we can, and I'm hoping that what I present to you will help you be able to break down any sentence moving forward, okay? So the first thing that we're going to look for in this sentence are the independent clauses. So in the first portion of that sentence, there was an independent clause that just said he was on allergy injection therapy for about 2 years. Now, just to go into what independent clauses are, in the most basic form, they are a complete sentence that makes perfect sense on its own. Some people will get a bit more into the grammar rules and say that an independent clause has to have a subject and a verb. And while that may be true, I don't want to get too much into the big grammar terms today. I want to try to keep things simple and just show you that basically all sentences start with an independent clause or a basic complete sentence. And then we're just going to add frills on top of that, or perhaps a list or something like that. So we're just going to start with the basics. So here's our basic sentence. And then we're going to add an introductory element to that. So of note, he was on allergy injection therapy for about 2 years. So we have added information before the independent clause. It's not a complete sentence on its own. It's just added information. And something to take note of is an introductory element. There's an exception, of course. So you're going to set off the introductory element with a comma, like we've done here. And on all of these examples with this particular sentence, I'm going to keep this independent clause highlighted in yellow so you can see what happens to it as we add more elements to it. So we're going to set off the introductory element with a comma, but you'll see in these examples, an introductory element, if it is short, like this one, so 4 words or less is what we use in our keys. The Book of Style doesn't state what a short introductory element is, so I will just let you know that we base it on 4 words or less. So if your intro is 4 words or less and can also answer when, where, why, or how often, you don't place a comma. So on examination, it's 2 words long, and it answers when or where, I guess, depending on how you look at that. And so since it follows both of those rules, it's 4 words or less, and it answers one of those questions, we don't put a comma. And I know it goes against our ingrained habits from what we did before, but we're just going to be following the Book of Style for medical transcription. So keep that in mind. In the third example here, because he was so congested, he took a Benadryl tablet. So that intro element is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words long. It does answer why, but because it's 5 words, not 4 words or less, we're going to place the comma anyway. So it's not following both of those rules. Um, if the person had said because he was congested, then we'd have 4 words and it would also answer why. So we would remove the comma. But because this is 5 words, we're going to keep that comma. So that's just something to just take pause when you add an introductory element before your sentence, at the start of your sentence. Just stop for a second and ask yourself, is it 4 words or less? If not, if it's 5 words or more, you go ahead and put that comma. But if it's 4 words or less and can answer when, where, why, or how often, then don't put a comma. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to add an afterthought or sometimes an appositive, and I'm going to explain both of those in a second. So here's the sentence we started with, and we have added on finding it beneficial. So of note, he was on allergy injection therapy for about 2 years, finding it beneficial. So just talking about afterthoughts here, it's added information added to the end of your sentence. So after your independent clause or after your basic sentence, it cannot stand alone as a complete sentence on its own. So if I walked up to you and said, hey, finding it beneficial, you wonder what I was talking about, right? That's not a complete sentence. So it's added information about the complete sentence before. It doesn't stand alone as a sentence on its own. It's not essential information, it's added information. So you're going to set it off with a comma. Okay, now when I talk about essential information as to whether it's essential to the meaning of that sentence, sometimes that can be a bit gray. And so you'll see sometimes in our keys where there might be a comma setting off an afterthought. And you may not have put it because you might think that the information following was essential. And it can sometimes be a gray area. I'll give you an example off the top of my head that I like to use with students. And that would be, after work today, I'm going to do the dishes if I'm in the mood. So some people would argue that if I'm in the mood to do the dishes would be essential to the meaning, and they wouldn't put a comma there. Others would say that it's added information, and you could argue it either way. And this is why we don't deduct for those afterthoughts, is because they can be a bit of a gray area. So again, just remember it's added information added on after your complete sentence. It does not stand alone as a sentence on its own. So here's another example. He has never reacted to morphine as far as he knows. So as far as he knows is not a complete sentence on its own, and it's added information after that complete sentence. He was referred to our neurologist, Dr. Simpson. So in this case, the afterthought is also an appositive. So what an appositive is just added information about the noun right before that comma. So who's the neurologist? It's Dr. Simpson. So that's why it's set off with a comma. So you could call that an afterthought. You could call it an appositive. Either way, it's added information after that complete sentence. It doesn't stand alone as a complete sentence on its own. Here's another example of an appositive. He's had a month of lumbar pain, right-sided. So where's the lumbar pain? It's right-sided. So again, you could see that as an afterthought. You could see it as an appositive. Either way, it's added information after our complete sentence. So it's kind of like we're setting off the frills that we're adding to our complete sentence with commas. Okay, so now we're going to add either an interrupting element or an appositive. So here's our basic sentence again, and now you can see that we've added information right smack in the middle of that basic sentence. Our basic sentence is still highlighted in yellow, and we have added according to his chart right in the middle. So of note, he was on allergy injection therapy according to his chart for about 2 years, finding it beneficial. So we just take off that intro element and the afterthought and just look at the rest of it. He was on allergy injection therapy according to his chart for about 2 years. The important things with interrupting elements is, so that's just added info smack in the middle of your sentence, and it happens all the time. Doctors are speaking off the top of their heads. You're probably going to hear me do it many times today as well while I speak off the top of my head, but they'll remember information they want to give while they're in the middle of their sentence. So this happens all the time. You need to ask yourself a couple of things about those interrupting elements, okay? So first of all, if you remove that interrupting element, you should still have a complete sentence that makes perfect sense. So if I take it according to his chart, I still have that basic sentence that I started with. Proper grammar still makes sense. The other thing that's important to ask yourself is, if I take that text out, that interrupting element, does the meaning change at all? If the meaning of the sentence changes without it, then it doesn't qualify as an interrupting element because it's considered essential information. And again, there are times that that interrupting element as to whether or not it's essential to the meaning of the sentence could be argued. And again, that's why we don't deduct for this particular type of commas. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So here's again the A positive, but now the A positive is in the middle of the sentence instead of at the end. So she saw our orthopedist, Dr. Taylor, last week. Who's orthopedist? It's Dr. Taylor. That's our A positive. You could also call it an interrupting element, but it's added information about the noun right before that comma. So just added info right in the middle of that sentence. Okay. But again, here's what we talked about. Is the information essential to the meaning? So this is an example I often use. The tumor was approximately 5 millimeters wide. A lot of times when I see the word approximately in a sentence, students want to set it off in commas, make it an interrupting element. The problem with that is, yes, if I take out the word approximately, we still have a complete sentence. We can say the tumor was 5 millimeters wide. That makes perfect sense, but the meaning is completely changed. The difference between approximately 5 millimeters wide and exactly 5 millimeters wide is really important, and in fact could be life or death when it comes to a tumor. So approximately is essential information to the meaning of that sentence, so we don't want to set it off in commas. Now, you're not going to underline it, of course. I just did this to sort of draw attention to it. Here's another example. Her IT band was tender to palpation. So just to clarify, the IT band is on the outside of your upper leg. So that sort of indentation on the side of your leg. So her IT band was tender to palpation. The leg was otherwise unremarkable. Again, otherwise is something that everybody tends to want to always set off in commas. But if we take otherwise out, the leg was unremarkable. Yes, that's a complete sentence, but was the leg unremarkable? In fact, there was something that they found, the IT band was tender. So that is essential to the meaning. They're trying to say that other than the IT band, the leg was unremarkable. So I would not put otherwise within commas. Okay, so let's take it to the next level. So if we remember that initial sentence we had that was quite long, here it is here, but now I've added on that second independent clause. So there's our first sentence. Of note, he was on allergy injection therapy according to his chart for about 2 years, finding it beneficial. So the yellow parts are our first complete sentence, and we've added an intro, an interrupter, and an afterthought. Now we're going to add on a second complete sentence. The symptoms returned when he stopped the therapy. Okay, now we want to join them with a conjunction word in this case. So that's what we had at the beginning. So we're going to add on the conjunction word but, and it is joining two complete sentences together to form what's called a complex sentence. Okay, so a lot of people find it difficult to start to recognize the conjunction words. I'm going to date myself. There was a cartoon many years ago, and it had a little skit on it called the Conjunction Junction. It was a little song. If you Google it, I'm sure you can find it. Will help you with conjunctions. But the one way that I was taught was to remember the most common ones anyway, with the acronym fanboys. So fanboys are big Star Wars fans. But fanboys in our case, we're going to just remember each letter. So F is for for. A can be a few things, and, as, or although. N is for nor, B is for but, O is for are, Y is for yet, and S is for so. So those are the ones you're going to hear over and over and over again. And those words function as conjunctions only if they're joining two complete sentences together. Right? So if you see one of those words, just stop for a second and see the sentence and say, is there a complete sentence before this conjunction, and is there a complete sentence after this conjunction? So not fragment sentences, like instead of saying he came in today for assessment, if they just said came in today for assessment, that's a fragment sentence. We want a complete sentence. So if you see a complete sentence before that word and a complete sentence after that word, hook them together with the comma. So just remember, the comma looks like a hook. This is going to sound really basic, but my mom was a primary school teacher, and the other way that she sometimes talked about it was each complete sentence was a train car. If you picture older trains anyway, the way they were joined together was that the one car would have something that looked like an eye at the end, or like a, if you picture a sewing needle, like the eye where you put the thread through, we would have that at one end. The other one would have a hook, and you just put the hook in the eye and it would join them together. So picture the green sentence here is your one train car, the conjunction word is your eye, and then your yellow sentence is the other train car, and that comma is the hook. So if you got two complete train cars or two complete sentences, hook them together before the conjunction. Okay, I know that's basic, but sometimes people who are visual, that is really helpful for, so I wanted to spit that out just in case it helps anybody. So just keep an eye on that. So again, remember, comma goes before the conjunction. Okay, now in that second sentence, the green one, we're going to add an introductory element. And this trips people up often. So what we want to look at is, let's just ignore that first sentence. Let's ignore what's before the conjunction and just look like what comes after that conjunction. So the complete sentence is still here in green. The symptoms return when he stopped the therapy. We've added unfortunately now as an introductory element. So we just set it off with a comma. We don't need a comma after the conjunction word. We're only going to look at what comes after that introductory element. The introductory element is short, but it doesn't answer when, where, why, or how often. So we're going to put that comma. Okay, so that's the basics of it, is you really want to look at each sentence before and after, I won't say sentence, each independent clause before and after that conjunction separately. That just helps you break it down. So you're looking for your independent clauses, and then what frills are we adding that we have to set off with commas. But remember, if you've got an introductory element right after a conjunction, just worry about the punctuation after that introductory element. Don't put a comma between your conjunction and that intro. Okay. Okay, so now we're just adding an afterthought to that second sentence. So unfortunately, the symptoms return when he stopped the therapy, despite my advice to continue on with it. So that afterthought is not a complete sentence on its own. It's added information, so we're just going to set it off with a comma. So here we're just building and building onto these complete sentences. And then we're going to add the interrupter. So like above, now we see that the green sentence has been split up with the word however. So we take however out, we still have a complete sentence. It doesn't change the meaning, so we can set however off with commas. But unfortunately, the symptoms returned, however, when he stopped the therapy, despite my advice to continue on with it. So it's really as simple as that, is when you have this great big overwhelming sentence, stop for a second and break it down into bits and pieces. Where are your basic complete sentences? And then go from there. Do I have introductory elements? Do I have afterthoughts? Do I have interrupting elements? Is there a conjunction word to join two complete sentences together? It's really just as basic as that, but the key is really trying to pick out where your independent clauses are, your basic sentences. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about lists. Okay, so here's just your basic list. His medication list includes adver, comma, Claritin, comma, and singular. Okay, so something to take note of in medical transcription is when we have a list of things, you need, when there's not the word and or in between everyone, we'll get into that in a second, but you need to have a comma after each item, even before that word and, or say they said or at the end, you need to have a comma there too. I'll give you an example of why. I wish I had written these down when I was a quality assurance assessor, but I remember I would proofread coworkers' work, or if you had a blank, it would come to me. And the account that I worked on had slightly different account specs when it came to formatting your diagnoses. So if on my account, if they happen to list the diagnoses in sentence form, that's how you wrote them. And a few times I saw it that, let's call these A, B, and C. A few times I saw B and C written without that comma, and it made those last two diagnoses join together in a way that changed what it meant. And so I always imagined that that was getting copied to the family doctor. Family doctors are so busy. They might have just gone, okay, let's see what Susie's diagnosis ended up being. They might skip down to the bottom, and the meaning was completely different because it was missing that comma. So commas normally, don't stress yourself out too much about them because they rarely will change meaning, but in that case, it was a critical error because it changed the diagnosis completely. It would be kind of like saying, for breakfast, I had toast, juice, and eggs, and you didn't put a comma between juice and eggs. It would technically mean that juice and eggs were mixed together in a really gross smoothie. So always just be aware. Some people call this an Oxford comma. Make sure you've got that comma in there before and when you're listing them this way. It's called a simple series list if you want to be fancy. Now, if every item in your list is separated by the words and or, so Advair and Claritin and singular, you don't put any commas, or Advair or Claritin or singular, Advair and Claritin or singular, any of these combos, if you have and or between every single listed item, you don't need a comma. Sometimes people will also mistake what comes after. If they're listing two things, sometimes, depending on the wording, mistake what comes after and as almost like another sentence. Like if I said, he likes to bake and likes apple pie the best. Likes apple pie the best is coming after and, but it's not a complete sentence, it's actually a fragment sentence. If I came up to you and said, hey, likes apple pie the best, you would go, who? What are you talking about? Whereas if I said, so-and-so likes apple pie the best, that would be your complete sentence. So if I said he likes to bake and likes apple pie the best, I'm actually just telling you two things about him. I'm listing. And because there's two items in that list, I'm not going to put a comma before and. Okay, so sometimes and can be tricky, that we mistake it that it's always a conjunction, but it's not. It can just be separating items in a list. So keep an eye on that. Okay, so we're going to make this now a little bit more complex per se. We're going to turn it into what's called a complex list. So this is not punctuated correctly, but I wanted to show you. I have added a bit of extra information in an interrupting element about Claritin. So I've now said his medication list includes Advair, Claritin, the addition of which he finds helpful, and singular. So now I have a comma between my commas. So you can see the two blue commas are my original commas, and the green is the added comma between commas. Right? Gets a bit confusing. It's a little hard to read. So what we do in a case like this is we turn those outer commas, the ones between each listed item, into semicolons. Okay, no, that's a tiny bit hard to see. It's about one of the lightest highlighting colors I could find, but you want to turn your blue, so your original commas, into semicolons. Oh, now I've got this in my road. Oh, well. Okay, sassy semicolons. I've got into alliteration when I was doing this. So more on semicolons. So yes, you're going to use semicolons in a complex list, but they can also be used to join two closely related independent clauses together. So if you've got two complete sentences that are really closely related in topic, you can choose, stylistically, it's a stylistic choice, You can choose to join them together with a semicolon, but no more than 2 complete sentences. I have seen people join 3, 4, 5 complete sentences together with a semicolon. Don't do that. No more than 2. So his blood pressure measured 140/90 yesterday. Today it is 130/80. Those are 2 complete sentences. They both make perfect sense on their own. And then the thing is, they're both about his blood pressure. So if you wanted to, you could change that period to a semicolon. If you put a period and the key has a semicolon, and it's a case like this where it's 2 complete sentences, that's fine. If you put a semicolon and the key has a period and you've got 2 complete sentences that are really closely related in topic, that's fine too. And if you're not sure, give us a shout and ask us about it. We're happy to help. I know acceptable variations sometimes can be confusing, so we're happy to clarify. Okay, so 2 closely related independent clauses or complete sentence. Okay, so the other thing that you might use semicolons with is complementary transitional words and phrases. So subsequently, therefore, would be really good examples of these. So don't worry too much about the terms there, but it's just a word, again, that's transitional joining 2 complete sentences together. So the first example is our period. She was given 2 puffs of her albuterol inhaler. Subsequently, she was able to catch her breath. Period's fine. She was given 2 puffs of her albuterol inhaler, semicolon. Subsequently, she was able to catch her breath. So again, these sentences are really closely related. And subsequently is like a transitional word that transitions you from one sentence to the other, but they're both really closely related. So you can choose to use the semicolon if you want to. If not, use the period. That's fine. And then transitional words with contrasting transitional words. So however is the main one with this. So she has been using Benadryl cream. However, she has not found it helpful. So again, those are 2 really closely related sentences about the Benadryl cream. So you can choose to put a semicolon before however and join the 2 sentences together if you want to. When it comes to the word however, just a little trick that I like to use is when it's like this. So however, if we look up here, is at the beginning of the second independent clause or complete sentence. How I decide in my mind if I want to use a period or semicolon is I just replace however with the word but in my head, and if it makes perfect sense and flows, I tend to go with the semicolon. So if I had said she's been using Benadryl cream but she has not found it helpful, that flows perfectly in my mind, so I would choose the semicolon. But again, it's a stylistic choice. It's completely up to you. The period would be acceptable as well. If the 2 sentences didn't flow, in my mind, I would then separate them with the period, so it's a bit more separation. Again, it's a stylistic choice. All right, so let's talk a bit more about however. All right, so like we just talked about, we can use the period or we can use a semicolon when we're joining 2 complete sentences together. And again, with a semicolon, those 2 complete sentences are really closely related in topic, right? The other example that I wanted to show you is when however acts as an interrupter. We saw this in an earlier example. So now I've just kind of switched the words around a little bit. She, however, has not found it helpful. So in this case, however, is acting as an interrupting element. We would put commas on either side of it. Now the word however, generally, it's always going to have a comma after it, no matter what, right? So however, she has not found it helpful. It's an introductory element there. So you want to set it off with a comma. So always a comma after however, but what comes before it just depends. If it's at the beginning of the sentence and the sentence before is closely related, you could choose to use a semicolon. If they're not that closely related, use a period. But when however is smack in the middle of your sentence, it's got to be a comma before it. So I wouldn't say she semicolon however comma, because she is not a complete sentence. So that's the key, is your semicolon in this case is just joining 2 complete sentences together. So keep an eye out for that. Look at where however is in the sentence. If it's at the end, she has not found it helpful. However, you would put comma. However, it would be an afterthought in that case. Okay, let's talk about vital signs. This is a very confusing topic for students because of the different acceptable variations. And I've given you some examples here. And really, there are a lot more ways that I could have presented it that all would have been acceptable, but I'm just going to go with the basics. So let's say they're listing your vital signs: blood pressure 110/64, temp 36.8, weight 60 kilograms. Perfectly fine. We've listed it. That's fine. You could also use periods instead if you wish. This is the way that I tend to prefer, just because I find that cleaner to read. I tend to always be thinking, I know where I work, that every report I did was copied to a family doctor. What's easier to read? My opinion, I guess just a personal opinion, I find the periods are easy to read, so it's easy peasy, just put a period after each one. But the commas are acceptable too. If they had introduced it with something like his vital signs included a blood pressure, blah, 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 I would put them in the same sentence then, because of that introduction that he's saying his vitals included these. But in this case, it's just separate vital signs, so you can go either way. Now, the thing you have to be careful of is if you choose to go with those commas, keep an ear open if one of those vitals has a verb. Now, all of a sudden, that particular vital becomes a complete sentence on its own. Weight is 60 kilograms. We've got a subject and a verb now. We've got a complete sentence. So because we have a complete sentence, we have to start it a new sentence with that. So I put a period before it and started with weight is. If it had been temp is, I would have put a period likely and then put temp is and gone from there. So keep an eye out for those verbs, or an ear open for them. If you choose to go with the periods and you missed a verb, punctuation is still correct. That's kind of why I tend, it's another reason why I like the periods. But again, that's just me. Everybody's different. Another thing you could do with that last sentence there is join it with the semicolon, because we're all talking about vitals. So we have this sentence about vitals and we have the next sentence about vitals. You can set them off with a semicolon because it's only one more sentence, so it's no more than two sentences joined with a semicolon. So these all look really different, but they're all acceptable. So if you're working on reports and you're finding that the vitals are a bit confusing and you're not sure if yours is an acceptable variation, ask us. If you choose to just go with periods after each one, it's acceptable. Keep in mind though, like say in the middle here it said, I don't know, respiratory rate 35 labored. So we'd have 35 comma labored because we're giving added info. You've got to have that comma before labored, of course, but then you would put your period and then the next vital. Watch out for things like that, but this is the basics to it. So see what you like to do, play with it and see what you think, and ask us if you're unsure. All right, horrible hyphens. These were the bane of my existence. I'm sure that all of you who have ever heard me on a Q&A or former webinars have heard me talk about hyphens. I think pretty much everyone struggles with these, and I really hesitated to call in to ask for help because I'm shy and I admit that I'm stubborn. So I did not call in, and I struggled with them and could never get them right. And then I called in and someone gave me this trick, kind of a two-part trick, and the light bulb just went off. So I want to teach it to you. Anyone who has been in my Q&A sessions will likely have heard this, but bear with me here. I think this really is helpful. I'm going to just give you one example that's obviously not going to be hyphenated as a compound modifier, okay? So if I were trying to decide, she has a black fluffy dog. If I'm trying to decide if black fluffy should be hyphenated or not, what I want to do is test each of those words with the noun they're describing. So the word they're describing here is dog. So I'm going to check each one with dog. She can have a black dog. She can have a fluffy dog. Both of those make sense. You can't misunderstand them to mean anything else. So they're just two separate adjectives describing the dog. So that's nice and clear. Now, if I say he is a soft-spoken man, do we need to hyphenate soft-spoken? You want to test them. He is a soft man. Does that mean that he's soft to the touch or he's sensitive? And if I say spoken man, that doesn't make sense. So what has made sense to me now is soft spoken has to work together as a unit to describe the man. So I'm going to hyphenate them to make them into a unit. So if what I'm trying to say here is that he speaks quietly. A soft man doesn't mean the same thing. Spoken man doesn't make sense. So you're going to hyphenate soft spoken to work as a unit together to describe the man. That's basically what a compound modifier is when different words are hyphenated together to work as a unit to describe something else. For me, that whole idea of whether it has to work together as a unit, that made the biggest difference for me. So maybe try thinking about that way. Now, this particular trick works best with 2-word combos. You can have 3-word combos. I'll give you one in a minute, or sometimes more. He has left side more than right pain. So left side more than right is actually all working together to describe the pain. So there are instances like that, but I wanted to start with the basics and get you used to testing that out and seeing what you think. So now we have our possible compound modifier coming after the noun. It's describing our pronoun. So we're describing he, we're describing this man. He is well appearing. So when it's coming after, and mind you, it may take you a little while to start to recognize these when they're coming after what they're describing, but it will come. So if I say he is well appearing, we mean to say he looks good, he looks healthy. If I say he is appearing, right, I'm going to test it with the second word. He is appearing. It doesn't mean the same thing at all. Is he appearing on Broadway? Is he appearing out of thin air? Is he appearing at your door? It doesn't mean that he looks well. It has a completely different meaning. So in that case, well appearing has to work together as a unit to describe this person, right? So I'm going to hyphenate it. Now, in a very similar one, he is well developed, meaning he's physically mature. So my test for this would be he is developed. It means the same thing, can't be misunderstood, makes perfect sense. I don't have to hyphenate that. It does not need to work as a unit to make sense, right? So hopefully the light bulbs are going off for other people there the way they did for me. So this has helped me a lot. Now, let's get a bit more complicated. She twisted her ankle at the high school dance. So we're describing the dance. But a high school is just one thing, even though it's made up of 2 words. So we don't need to hyphenate high school because high school is one thing, it's describing the dance. So we don't need to worry about that. Another tough one, his slouching is causing upper back pain. A lot of people will hyphenate upper back to describe the pain, but actually what we're describing is the back pain. And this gets tricky. This is where I would get frustrated. It does take time. So where is the back pain? Upper, it's upper. Low back pain, it's low. So we're describing the back pain. So in this case, the noun we're describing is made up of 2 words, even though it's one thing. So that's the thing that can take a little bit of time to get used to, is the adjective one thing but made up of 2 words, or is the noun one thing but made up of 2 words? Okay, so the other tip I wanted to mention is if it's a medical term and you're not sure if it's hyphenated, easiest thing to do is just go quickly look it up. Excuse me, I'm just going to take a sip of my tea. So I've been working in healthcare well over 20 years in different jobs. And I have noticed that some of the medical terms, the hyphenation has changed slightly over time. It's like stylistic changes that have happened over time. So for me, if it's a medical term that I don't know really, really well, or if it's a term that I haven't typed in a while, a long while usually, like maybe over a year, I'm going to just go quickly look it up. So you could always go into a trusted medical dictionary. I'll use bare metal stent as an example. Do we need to hyphenate bare metal? So I would go and start to type bare space metal, start to type stent. In a medical dictionary, like if you have Stedman's, it might pop up that way in the drop down menu. If it didn't, I'd just go delete, and I'd go bare hyphen metal and see if it popped up. Sometimes you can see both ways. You may just have to do a little bit more digging to see which is correct. But for the medical terms, I tend to just quickly look them up if I'm not super familiar, if it's been a little while, because they do change. Things change over time. Great, guys. So now we're into quiz time. So I am just going to shrink my PowerPoint down a little bit so that I can see our lovely, I want to see our group chats here. I'm going to let everybody into the lobby. Okay, and I want to see your chats. Okay, so let's go to the quiz. I'm going to try to just resize things. You're going to see my dog there for a moment. Sweet little Sadie. I want to see your chats. Perfect. Okay. Are we ready? Okay. Apparently I'm not. I need to see my thumbnails. There we go. All right. So which of the following is incorrect? So we're looking for the one that's not punctuated correctly here. Every other Wednesday, he visits his chiropractor. At the park on Tuesday, he tripped over a rock. In general, I feel he is showing improvement. Which one of these is not punctuated correctly? Can anyone guess? A, B, or C? Feel free to just throw them up there. Don't be shy. There is no judgment here because I used to struggle over the exact same things. Okay, I've seen a lot of B's, 1A. Okay, so let's check the answer. In this case, B is the incorrectly punctuated sentence. So let's just look at these quickly. In here we have our basic sentence. He visits his chiropractor. The introductory element is every other Wednesday. So it's 3 words long and it answers how often or when. In C, it says, in general, I feel he's showing improvement. Now, a lot of people have said to me, well, in general would be where, but can you give me directions to general? So it's not really meaning a place. So we keep the comma, even though it's 2 words. So for B, at the park on Tuesday is 5 words. While it does answer both when and where, it's 5 words long. So we're going to put the comma. And that's what was missing. Okay, which of the following is incorrect? So again, we're looking for the one that is not correctly punctuated. His blood pressure today has decreased, semicolon. It was 140/95 yesterday. B, his blood pressure today has decreased, period. It was 140/95 yesterday. Or C, his blood pressure today has decreased, comma. It was 140/95 yesterday. All right, those C's are flying up on the board. That is fantastic. So C is the incorrect answer here, meaning it's the right one to choose, but it's incorrectly punctuated. And that's because we have 2 complete sentences, so we need either a period between them or the semicolon can be used because they're both about the blood pressure. Putting a comma there makes it, it's a comma splice, or some people might say it's a run-on sentence. So you want to make sure you've got 2 complete sentences. There's no conjunction word here. So we just have 2 basic complete sentences and that's it. So you don't want to put a comma between, you want to put a period. You could put a semicolon if you wanted. Good job, guys. Okay, which of the following is incorrect? A, his pain is left-sided. Left-sided is hyphenated. B, he has excellent range of motion. Range of motion is hyphenated. D, he has a 4-centimeter scar over his left eyebrow. 4 centimeter is not hyphenated. E, we performed a stool guaiac test. No hyphen. This one's tricky. His pain is left-sided. He has excellent range of motion. He has a 4-centimeter scar over his left eyebrow, or we performed a stool guaiac test. I'm going to just let you look at this for a second. Do the test in your minds. Okay, we've got a couple of answers. Throw those out. Okay. Okay. Yep. All right, we're all over the map. I knew this would be a toughie. Okay, so the one that's not correct is B. So let me explain. For B, he has excellent range of motion. Range of motion is not describing another noun in this case. If I said his range of motion testing is great, range of motion would be describing testing, so we would hyphenate it. When it's not describing another noun following range of motion, we don't hyphenate it. So that's something to keep in mind, and it's really a common error that I see. So just remember, range of motion would have to come right before a word it's describing for it to be hyphenated. When we say his pain is left-sided, we wouldn't say his pain is sided. That doesn't make sense. Probably the only thing that is sided would be a house, really. So left-sided has to work as a unit. It's hyphenated to describe where his pain is. Now, with 4 centimeter scar, if this were non-metric, if we said 4-inch scar, you would hyphenate it because the word inch would be written out. And these are rules that are in your book of style. When it's metric, remember we abbreviate a metric unit of measure when it's with a numeral measurement, and we don't hyphenate that. Even if it looks like a compound modifier, if it's metric, we've got an abbreviated metric unit of measure, don't hyphenate it. If it's non-metric, like inch, and it's written out, you can hyphenate that. You should hyphenate that when it's acting like a compound modifier, but not the metric when it's abbreviated. Now, the last one is tricky. I threw this in there just to see, because this is really tricky. In this case, the noun we're describing is the guaiac test. What kind of guaiac test? It's a stool guaiac test, because guaiac tests can be done on more than one thing. So stool is describing a noun that's made out of 2 words. Tricky, tricky. Okay, which sentence is punctuated correctly this time? Now, I threw in some goodies here, so really look these over. Which one's right? In summary, he has, unfortunately, developed an egg allergy, and sadly, quiche is a favorite food of his. Or B, his vaccines are up to date, and he thinks he is due for a general physical in approximately 5 months, which sounds about right. Take your time, we're not in a rush. Good job. Good job, guys. You guys are so good. So in this case, the one that is correctly punctuated is B. So here's our basic sentence. His vaccines are up to date. That's sentence number 1. Now we have the conjunction and, so let's look at that. We've got a complete sentence before and, but do we have one after and? He thinks he is due for a general physical in approximately 5 months. That's a complete sentence. So in this case, and is joining 2 complete sentences together, so we want that comma before it, hook them together, and then we just happen to have an afterthought about that second independent clause, right? So we set that off with a comma. Now, in the first one, the issue here is we have the word and, it is joining 2 complete sentences together, but we don't need a comma between the conjunction and that introductory element. So you guys had it. All right, one more, which is correct. A, his blood pressure today was well controlled, and he fortunately feels that the Lipitor has helped, though it may be causing a cough, so we will keep watch. Or B, he tells me that he eats healthfully, saying that he regularly consumes fruits, vegetables, preferring carrots over greens, lean meats, and low-fat dairy. I went with some nice long-winded sentences because doctors are really good at that. So, all right, everybody's saying A for the most part. That's right, so A is correct. So his blood pressure is well controlled. It's our first independent clause. We have a conjunction. It is, in fact, joining 2 complete sentences together. He feels that the Lipitor has helped. That's our sentence. So then we put in an interrupter. Whoops. And we put in added info and then a second conjunction for your extra long-winded dictators and another independent clause. So yes, you can have more than one conjunction in a sentence. And again, doctors are talking off the tops of their heads, and you never know what kind of sentences will come. So sometimes you might even want to type out the sentence and then just, like I'm saying, just then pick it apart after that. Okay, so the issue here is we have a list, but we've got an added interrupting element here. We've added info about those vegetables. So we would need to turn the other commas into semicolons. Awesome. All right, guys. That was it. I am going to I meant you to see, woo, the wow, just to really congratulate you guys on how well you did.